Folks, if I could have your attention, we've got going to have a very interesting presentation and need to have enough time to get through it all and allow for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and begin now. So thanks again for being here, and I'm going to introduce someone who's going to introduce our speaker, because this person introduced me to the speaker and suggested him as a speaker and served with him. This is a former person who has spoken twice to our club, and I'm going to ask to make his way up here Joe Epley, who is a Green Beret. He's done all sorts of things that Green Berets do, including canoeing the Arctic Wilderness River, hiking the Australian outback, helping restore homes hurt by hurricanes. For 40 years, Joe led Epley Associates, a public relations firm in Charlotte. He was co-founder and global chair of the WorldCom Public Relations Group, the world's largest consortium of independent public relations firms. He's a member of a number of nonprofit foundations. He is the holder of the Gold Anvil, which is the highest award in the public relations profession for lifetime achievement, and also is a holder of the Order of the Longleaf Pine, which is North Carolina's highest award that it gives for noteworthy citizens. So I'd like to introduce Joe Epley, who will introduce our speaker. Joe also, I should say, I get a cut for any of the purchases that are made in the next 24 hours on Amazon, he spoke about the Revolutionary War and wrote 2 great books on the Revolutionary War, A Passel of Hate and A Passel of Trouble, because the Revolutionary War was a really different kind of war. These 2 books are historical novels that give you a real feel for what it's like. And I'll give you my address for the commission checks.
No, you're certainly
No, wait a minute.
all of
There we
them.
go.
Okay.
You'll put that on.
Okay. You know, to stand here and recite the resume of Lieutenant General Mike Tucker would take all the time allocated for his talk, and then some. So I'm just going to hit the highlights. He enlisted in the Army as a private, served 7 years as an enlisted man, reaching the rank of Sergeant First Class, which most of you who were enlisted know that that's a pretty good achievable, pretty significant achievement. Then he was accepted to OCS, where he graduated as a distinguished military graduate. He continued with rapid promotions from drill sergeant to platoon commander to company commander. He commanded an armored battalion and an armored brigade in combat. Among his assignments during his 44-year career in the Army, General Tucker was the executive officer for the commanding general of the U.S. Army Europe and the 7th United States Army, and the assistant division commander for the 1st Armored Division. Then when scandal hit Walter Reed Medical Center in 2007, the Army Chief of Staff reached down into the ranks of the combat arms, not the medical corps, and they selected General Tucker to bring back confidence to the wounded warriors and their families, as well as the American people and Walter Reed. After successfully accomplishing that mission, he was promoted to Major General and assigned the Chief of Operations for the NATO mission in Afghanistan, which was followed by command of the 2nd Infantry Division in Seoul, Korea. When that assignment was successfully completed, General Tucker was assigned as the Department of Army's Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff, G3, in the Pentagon. And in 2013, he was promoted to Lieutenant General in command of the 1st United States Army, which included all of the Army Reserve and National Guard forces. Then 3 years later, he retired. And he came back to his native Charlotte with his high school sweetheart, Teresa, who had been with him all those years. They have a home on Lake Wylie, where he enjoys their 3 children, 10 grandchildren. And he told me, though, that his best job now is that of Charlie Hayes' driver. Now, Charlie is a command sergeant major, 93 years old, and the father-in-law of General Tucker. And he's also a former Special Forces teammate of mine. So let me sum up this introduction with the words of General Richard Cody when he appointed General Tucker to attack the problems and lapses exposed at Walter Reed Hospital. He understands soldiers. He understands leading in combat. He understands how to run a large organization. He's going to be the guy we look to be the soldiers and families' advocate as they go through inpatient and outpatient care. But also, he's going to be a bureaucratic buster and take on this bureaucracy which at times frustrates so many of our soldiers. So I'll give you the unconventional Lieutenant General, Michael Tucker.
Bob, I think that sometime next year we may want to have a discussion about what happened at Walter Reed 2007. It affected our entire nation. It was quite an experience for me. When I got that assignment, I called my mentor, Marty Dempsey, who later became the chairman of the Joint Staff. He's a professor at Duke right now. I said, sir, what the hell am I going to do at Walter Reed? Can y'all hear me? I said, what am I going to do at Walter Reed? He said, you're going to excel. I said, sir, I can't even put a Band-Aid on without messing that up. And I'm just a knuckle-dragging armor officer. And he said, Mike, you never grow in your comfort zone. You grow when you're uncomfortable. You grow when you're placed outside your comfort zone and you're challenged. And he said, you're going to be challenged beyond anything you've ever imagined. But they wouldn't have picked you if they didn't think you could do it. And so I guess I survived that. I want to start today. Are there any Air Force veterans here? Good. I love the Air Force. As an armor officer, I really love the Air Force because you don't do a lot with tanks in large maneuver if you don't have air superiority, and we've had the privilege of having that every time I've been to combat. I want to tell a short story here to kind of put a little levity in the room about a Air Force C-130 that was scheduled to leave Thule Air Base, Greenland last winter about midnight. During the pilot's pre-flight check, he discovered that the latrine holding tank was still full from the last flight. So a message went to the base support people, and an airman who was off duty was called in to take care of it. Young man finally gets to the air base and makes his way to the aircraft, only to find out that the latrine pump truck had been left outdoors and it's frozen solid. So he had to find another truck in the hangar, and that just took more time. He returns to the aircraft and is obviously less than enthusiastic about the job he's about to have to do. And nevertheless, he goes about the pumping job deliberately and carefully and slowly as to not risk criticism later. He leaves the plane. The pilot stops him and says, son, your attitude and performance has caused this flight to be late, and I'm going to personally see to it that you're just not just reprimanded, but you're punished as well. Shivering in the cold with his task finished, the airman takes a deep breath, stands tall, and says, sir, with all due respect, I am not your son. I am an airman in the United States Air Force. I've been cooped up here in Thule, Greenland for about 11 months now without any leave or pass. I have one stripe. It's 2:30 in the morning. The temperature is minus 40 degrees, and my job is to pump crap out of an airplane. Sir, just exactly what form of punishment did you have in mind? The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has before I start, I just want to recognize a person here today. His name was Russell Siebert. And he's sitting right there, and he talks out loud sometimes because he has hearing aids and they're not turned up right, and that's okay. And Russell, like my father-in-law Charlie, are 93 years old. Russell served in the Korean War. carried a BAR, Browning automatic rifle in the Korean War, in the 7th Infantry Division, cotton balers, by God. And then he served in Vietnam in the 25th Infantry Division. So we don't have a lot of Korean vets around. We don't have a lot of Vietnam vets around, but I'd like to give Russell a round of applause. Thank you for your service, Russell. Russell drove up from Florida to Lake Wylie yesterday, 93 years old. God bless him. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about the characteristics of large-scale combat, which has to be talked about in the context of the fighting that's going on in Eastern Europe right now. Because we haven't seen large-scale combat probably since World War II, or the initial stages of OIF-1, okay, which is in 2003. So we've gone 20 years without even getting a taste of what large-scale combat is. Okay, that's 2 decades of officers in our military who only know counterinsurgency operations or counterterrorism operations, and they're totally different. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes to kind of review with us some of the nuances, some of the different characteristics. And unlike our previous experience in combat, technology has added many more domains to the fighting battlefield. So it's not only land and air, which we are accustomed to in maritime, but space, information, cyber, and magnetic domains as well. And it should be noted that each of these domains have been seen on the battlefield in Ukraine. And if we are expected to win, read Ukraine, they're going to have to dominate these domains in order to succeed against an opposing peer competitor, which Russia certainly is. I've been studying this conflict since it started, like many of you probably have. And I've used the RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, as a reference primary, the ISW, the Institute for Study of War, and CSIS, the Center for Strategy and International Studies, and my good friend, I don't know if you know him, his name's Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges. If you want to get a dose of sage wisdom, just down to earth with a Tennessee drawl of what's going on in Ukraine, and Ben, like I say, is a close friend, and he's the former commander of U.S. Army Europe. YouTube Ben Hodges, Ukraine, and you'll get pretty good up-to-date videos of him. If anyone's watched any of his videos, if you haven't, they're pretty good. And Ben's, I think, a little optimistic. That's okay. I'm an optimist myself. But he's pretty good. And so I've used those to kind of table. I gave this pitch in London in June, and it was pretty well received. And so I thought maybe sharing it with you folks might be worthwhile as well. And it's, as you well know, this is a moving target. There are no definites. It's a moving target. It's changing every day. If you ask me how many tanks has Russia destroyed in the Ukrainian army, I'd say, what day are you talking about? And tomorrow might be even different. So operations conducted in large-scale combat is what we're talking about. The tempo is accelerated, and that's to gain momentum and initiative. And the environment is total chaotic. Simultaneity, usually high tempo, the likes of which our current brigade, division, corps staffs have yet to see, but we do that in our war games. Like I said earlier, conflict across all the domains, and most importantly, lethality is exponentially increased when you're fighting an adversary, putting brigades and battalions at risk for catastrophic losses. For example, in Kasserine Pass in 1943, we lost over 1,000 soldiers a day during the first 3 days, in the first 3 days of the fighting. In December 44, we lost 400 soldiers a day at the Battle of the Bulge. In contrast to Iraq and Afghanistan, where we fought at the platoon and company level, we had 0 to 3 losses a day. And in the 22 years we were in those conflicts, we lost 7,000. Now, 1 is too many, don't get me wrong. 1 is too many. 7,000 in 22 years. We lost 5,000 U.S. soldiers on D-Day alone, and 78,000 just getting through the hedgerows and the bocage of Normandy. So when you look at things, look at it in scale. And the units of actions, like I said, are divisions, brigades, corps that have to move constantly because of constant surveillance. From 2016 to 2021, I served as a senior mentor for the Army's Mission Command Training Program, which exercises divisions and corps. Division's about 18,000 troops, 2-star general. That's where Tom James is today, in fact, doing that. And the interesting thing is that we operated out of forward operating bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. You may have heard them called FOBs. So we were kind of stationary. We sent patrols out, mostly platoon-sized strength. Patrol here, patrol there, maybe a company every once in a while, okay? In large-scale combat, you're not in a FOB. If you are, you're dead. In that wargaming that I did senior mentor work for MCTP, where Tom James is now, we had a God view screen. It showed all the entities in the simulation, all enemy and all blue, all U.S. And I could go into the operator and tell him I just want to see tanks. I just want to see attack helicopters. One day I walked in because I was curious. I said, take everything off the screen except UAVs. I just want to see UAVs, blue and red UAVs. It blocked out the sun. I mean, it looked like 1,000 flies on a piece of white paper, okay? And so I share that with you so you get an appreciation for the fact that unlike any combat we've ever been in before, you are under constant observation. Constant. If you're seen, you can be hit. If you're hit, you can be killed. And so that changes the whole dynamic on the battlefield. And so what has to happen is you got to constantly move. You got to constantly move. You can't remain static. And when you do become static, it's not long before a UAV sees your signature and then artillery's coming. And so the other part of large-scale combat is in the division framework, the front's up here. You kind of get a picture of what the front's like, okay? Reconnaissance. Then you got the main battle area with the brigades in there fighting, okay? Going where the reconnaissance says the enemy is. Then you have this thing called the rear area. In large-scale combat, there's a lot going on in the rear area, most importantly, sustainment, to allow you to achieve what's called operational reach, so that the forward units have gas, they have bullets, they can continue to maneuver and attack, okay? Or in case of defense, they can continue to defend and fall back if necessary. But that rear area is very important for another reason. It's because that's where you consolidate gains, okay? Consolidating gains allows you to create a better state of peace when it's all over. And it has to happen simultaneous with the movement forward. So while the frontline troops are attacking, the rear area is consolidating gains. And what do I mean by that? They are taking care of displaced civilians. They're doing medical aid and care. They are cleaning up the battlefield of burning tanks and unexploded ordnance. They're repairing bridges that have been blown. They are working rapidly to try to reestablish civil control and civil authority in that rear area, okay? It's no longer a final phase in combat. It is conducted in conjunction with. And I think you'd agree that if you are intent bending an effort to do that, you could ostensibly create a better state of peace. I don't think we're seeing that in Ukraine on the Russian part at all. But that's an important part of large-scale combat because you have to do that. You've got to clean yourself up as you go. You can't wait until it's all over and then come back and start sweeping up the broken glass. You won't create a better state of peace because the people in the country will never believe it. And you may not have the time. You could go look at the results of the 2003 invasion to Iraq. Okay? The objective of that mission, which I was a tank brigade commander, was to remove the Saddam regime. Okay? We did. Well, what happened after that? We didn't consolidate gains. What happened after that? It became the gift that keeps on giving. Okay? Because when you lose the hearts and minds of the people, you're not going to win it back. And so that's why I talk about that. So let's talk about Crimea, because that's where this thing kind of all started. Do anybody remember the 2014 Winter Olympics? They were held in a place called Sochi, Russia. A few days after the February of 14 Winter Olympics, Putin attacks into and annexes the Crimea Peninsula, which belongs to Ukraine. And then, so how big is Crimea? And I did a kindergarten chart. You know, Crimea's down here, Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Azov, Romania, Moldova, obviously Ukraine proper. Crimea, 2.4 million people, 10,000 square miles, about the size of West Virginia. It's not a small place. Ukraine's only major port of Sevastopol, which is right there. It gives them access to the Mediterranean Sea. It is their economic center of gravity. It was transferred, it was given to, Ukraine received its independence from Russia in 1991. So it's been a sovereign part of Ukraine for over 32 years. And Putin just goes and takes it. Okay, and so in response, then later, that was in February. So in July the same year, he attacks into the Donbass region here, and then Luhansk in July of 2014. Okay, and the Ukrainian army responded. They sent in 2 brigades, and they noticed these things flying overhead called UAVs. And 4 minutes later, 2 battalions were totally destroyed, decimated. 2 battalions. They were smothered. Total loss, rendered combat ineffective in just minutes. And that was welcome to the modern battlefield. So some of the things we've learned from that particular conflict, that Russia demonstrated through its own forces and use of intermediaries, that they possess the acumen, strength, and sustainment infrastructure to fight hard and rigorous in combat. At the height of their offense, Donetsk and later Luhansk, in January of 15, Russia had deployed over 10,000 troops to Ukraine, and over 36,000 troops were in direct support. 27 of Russia's 57 tank and infantry brigades participated, equaling about 47% of the total Russian army. But the difference was, how did they pull it off? They had when I say interior lines, does anyone know what I mean by that? Interior lines is the ability, it would be like if we attacked into Canada from New York, but all of our forces stayed in New York and we just kind of rotated them out every 24 hours. So all our supplies in New York, so we had interior lines, okay? So what's different from 2014 to what happened in February of 22 was Russia had to create operational reach, and they were unable to do so because they had been pacified, I think, by operating off interior lines all those times, and figured that they could pull it off. They also created so much collateral damage that was the main impetus. You know, people talk about Russian sympathizers that were in those regions, and Putin was going to come in and liberate them. I don't know if you heard some of that. Okay, this activity in 2014 told them that that's not what that's not it, and they didn't want to have any. They didn't want to have any of that. Killed over the 2014-15 Russo-Ukraine war killed over 13,000 people, created 1.5 million displaced civilians, and 9% of Ukraine was then occupied by Russia. So how did Putin pull this off on a world stage? I mean, he did it in front of everybody. And so even with the February 22 attack, what was the result of that? The result was the UN declared Resolution 68-262 condemning the actions of Russia and recognized the integrity of Ukraine's territory. Then they later enacted multiple economic sanctions, which I'm not sure are working that well. We may see eventually, but for example, Pakistan and India are still buying Russian oil at bargain basement prices today. And so in 2008, so look at it, you know, what you see depends on where you sit. In 2008, Russia attacked the sovereign country of Georgia because they were beginning to lean westward, yearning for democracy. Kind of sounds like what happened in Ukraine, right? And what did we do? The UN and U.S. issued a decree and said that Russia shouldn't be in that country. 2011, Russia sent Russian troops into Yemen, you may recall, assisting Assad in repressing the Yemeni people. You may recall even used chemical weapons in Yemen. And what did we do? We condemned the action, sent out demarches, and urged for peace. late in 2021, even after that summer of 21, we knew, our intelligence sources knew that Putin was going to attack Ukraine in February. We knew it already. The Germans were still using the Nord Stream oil pipeline, providing massive funding for Russia's war machine. And then on the world stage, what was going on? Why did we get our eye off the ball? Early 21, we suffered our own crisis with the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And then later that same year, we had an ill-planned and sudden withdrawal from Afghanistan. So we're kind of thinking about our American eyes, our diplomatic eyes, were probably on a couple of different balls in the ball field, if you know what I'm saying, metaphorically. And I'm not claiming anything here other than the fact that I think the world gave Putin every reason to think the Western world would look the other way, as it had done so many times before. And just like it did when Saddam Hussein rattled his sabers and attacked in Kuwait in 1991. In fact, when asked, Saddam Hussein was asked, what would you do? This is prior to the invasion. His people, when they said, what do you think is going to happen? What will the Americans do? He said the Americans are nothing but paper tigers. And he decided to go into Kuwait. And of course, we know the end of that story. So what have we seen in the last 19 months in the current war between Russia and Ukraine? Get an appreciation for kind of how we got here and some of the indiscretions I think that President Putin has executed in Europe. First of all, how is it that a country of 144 million people, 850,000 active duty troops, and a military spending in excess of $65 billion is stymied by a country of 44 million, only 200,000 active duty troops, and military spending of $5.4 billion? By the way, just to give you a contrast, the United States proposed spending for 2023 is $816 billion. We have 1.4 million active duty, and of course our population is 330-some million people. So we're a pretty big actor on the world stage. So the primary failure of the Russian army has been low morale, poor unit cohesion, poor unit interoperability, poor unit inter-cooperation unit to unit, plus a total failure of leadership to react dynamically to changing situations and conditions. This is in part mostly because of the refusal to change the old Soviet military system, which operated since World War II, especially regarding doctrine, leadership, and equipment modernization. Even today, most of Russia is analog. This, coupled with a system which institutionally stifles initiative, promotes zero trust, provides no shared understanding, and is largely due to the failures in mid-management. How many of you in this room were a non-commissioned officer at some point in your life? Guess what the Russian army does not have? Non-commissioned officers. They have them, but they're only in name only. There's no mid-management in the Russian army. Decisions are made, major decisions are made by general officers. Lieutenant colonels in the Russian army are Sergeant E5s equivalent in terms of responsibility. So how do you get anything done if you don't have mid-management? There have been somewhere between 17 and 20 Russian general officers killed since February 22. General officers. You know how many general officers we've had killed in combat since the Korean War? One. David Green, good friend of mine, in Afghanistan, attending a graduation from the West Point-like education facility we stood up so they could generate officers. He's attending evaluation, and it was an Afghan soldier paid by the Taliban shot him in the back of the neck while he was attending that graduation. One. And the reason is because Russians don't trust anyone, not even themselves. They are reluctant to cede responsibility for fear of being deemed irrelevant or no longer needed, and they openly condone corruption at all levels. We think we've got some. We think we have some rough patches here in this great country we live in. You know, and there's allegations about politicians doing this and doing that. Folks, that is chicken feed. That doesn't even rise to the level. And if I have time, I'll share with you some vignettes that I saw in Russia that would turn your stomach. Because knowledge is power. I don't know if you've ever heard that metaphor. Knowledge is power, and everybody wants to be powerful. In fact, that term was coined by Sir Francis Bacon back in 1597, and Thomas Jefferson used it all the time like it was his own, by the way. But knowledge itself is power. But it comes to mind, however, that knowledge is power only if you know what facts to not bother with. So I think it's a good point in our discussion to share some of my experiences of training with the Russian Army during Operation Torgau. And Torgau is a river that runs through Saxony, the state of Saxony, which was in the former East Germany. It's about 70 kilometers northeast of Leipzig. And it was on that river on the 25th of April, 1945, that American GIs shook hands with Soviet Army troops. Because we were, believe it or not, we were allies in that battle, by the way. And so I was a one-star general. I had just finished being the executive officer to the Commander U.S. Army Europe, B.B. Bell. Anybody know B.B. Bell? Lives in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Good guy. I had been his XO, and he had been tasked by the State Department to extend a hand to Russia. Because you have to put things in perspective. We had just accepted, excuse me, we had just accepted multiple countries that were in the former Warsaw Pact into NATO. Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. They all had been brought into the, okay, and that didn't sit well with Russia. It made Russia a little nervous. I mean, what if Russia established itself on the Mexican border, and aligned itself with Mexico? What happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis? So we like a little standoff too. So you have to kind of appreciate that. So this was extending a hand out to them and trying to achieve some training with the Russian Army. And we had a State Department representative with us. And when I said, why are we going to do this? He simply said, better friend than enemy, which makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to share 3 vignettes that I think best describe what we're seeing today from the Russian Army's performance in their fight to take over the sovereignty of Ukraine. And so we went on a PDSS, which stands for Pre-Deployment Site Survey. I went with General Bell about a month before we did this, and we met the Russians, we met the generals, we met the soldiers that were going to participate with us. They were actually a combination of cadets from their military academy, like West Point. They were officers in our equivalent of Command and General Staff College or the War College, and they were soldiers from combat units. And so we went over there, we took our entire G staff, we met them, and then we came back 2 weeks later. And so the first thing we did was we had an entire infantry battalion, mechanized infantry battalion, in the field with the Russian Army at a training area about 40 miles north of Moscow. And they were doing hands-on training with Russian equipment. I'll show you some pictures. Oh, is that thing gone to sleep on us? While he's waking it up. So these soldiers are out in the field training with Russian tanks, Russian BMPs, rifles. They're shooting mortars. They're seeing they're understanding how to operate their radios and all this stuff. At the same time, we're in downtown Moscow at their Command and General Staff College with the division staff, about 65 officers, and we are going to conduct a mission analysis on an order. And so we are in this makeshift scenario. We're joined with the Russian Army. We're allies again, kind of like World War II. So we have a combined staff. That's the building we were in right there. And so we've got a combined staff, and we're going to do mission analysis on an order that's been given to us from a corps, a 3-star headquarters, okay? And we've combined to be a division staff with these Russian officers. Trying to make it, oh, here we go. So that's General Bell right here on the left. That's General Popov. And that's kind of their ceremonial thing, I respect you, you respect me. There we are. This is in the Moscow building I just showed you a picture of. These are Russian officers. The guy in the middle is a Russian officer. and the guy on the right and the guy on the left are division staff officers. In fact, that's the intelligence officer on the left, and that was the Army's, that was the division senior aviator on the right, talking to a Soviet staff officer. This is inside their building. We're collaborating. See, our laptops are there. We're starting to do planning. The guys in the dark are Russian staff officers. This is Popov on the right there. What's interesting is the guy sitting down, the Russian sitting down, his name is, his name is Gerasimov. Gerasimov is he's the current commander of all Russian land forces. I don't know if it's the same one, but this guy spoke fluent English. And, of course, he's aged a little bit since 2005. The guy on the left, Darrell Williams, was a colonel. He was our division artillery commander at the time. He is now the U.S. Army Europe commander. He's been promoted to 4-star. That's Darrell and I talking about an incident that occurred when one of our captains drank too much vodka the night before. I don't want to talk any more about that, but we were having a little heart-to-heart because I was his raider at the time. Here's the soldiers training on Russian equipment. You can see the Russian instructor there and the soldiers. Another of them getting trained. That's a BMP right behind them there. And that piece of equipment on the right side of the screen is a ground surveillance radar. We haven't used those since 1976. Shooting Russian mortars. AK-47 at the rifle range. That's a U.S. soldier. That's a BTR-60. That's a Russian soldier at the bottom, a U.S. soldier at the top. So you can kind of get an appreciation for the unity that we're creating, and these soldiers are training together, okay? Because what we did when we finished in Russia, we were there for about 3 weeks. We all packed up, and all of us came back to Germany. And then they did the same thing on our equipment. And by the way, they kind of like our mess halls better than theirs. Cabbage soup and raw herring doesn't compare to the food you get in an Army mess hall. This is at the conclusion of our staff work. We went out to a huge training area north of Moscow, as I mentioned earlier, and they did a live fire demonstration exercise. This is where some people in their former military, we used to call it a dog and pony show, but it's where you get out all your toys and you show them off to somebody who you hope is interested in seeing. Okay, so this was a terrain feature or a terrain board of the maneuver that they were going to do, and we're all sitting in bleachers watching this. These are the staff officers there that are communicating with the Russian troops. These radios, by the way, are 1960s technology. Now, this is 2005, okay, but this is 1960s technology. There we are sitting in the bleachers watching this thing. That's the division staff officers that have been in Moscow up to this point, and they're coming out to see these soldiers train. And this is this guy was part of the press out there. This is hard to see, but there's Russian tanks across the front, and there's BMPs behind them. And I don't know if you recall or saw the movie Patton, but if you saw the movie Patton, the initial scenes of the movie Patton, they're in Tunisia. Okay, and Patton is up on a bluff, and he's looking at the Germans attacking through a valley. And there's German tanks out there. They really weren't German tanks. They were U.S. M48s, but that's just Hollywood. I'm a tanker, so I take note of that. But anyway, so these German tanks are out there going down this valley. And there's infantry running behind the tanks. World War II, okay? And Patton, does anybody remember what Patton said as he looked? Because that was later in the movie. Because the artillery started to land. And he said, that's a waste of damn fine infantry. That's what he said. What do you think we saw here in 2005? The BMP, the tanks stopped, okay? They shot their main gun. Boom, boom, boom. Impressive. Okay? We shoot on the move, by the way. We don't stop. But that's another story. The back doors of the BMP open up. Infantry jump out. They are 2 kilometers, 1.6 miles away from the objective. These soldiers are loaded down with rucksacks, protective masks, weapons, machine guns, ammunition, grenades, blah, 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 blah. And they're running in undulating terrain that tanks have chewed up behind the tanks. I swear to God, I thought I was watching the first scene of Patton movie again in 2005. Okay, so what shape do you think the infantry are when they get to the objective? They ain't got a lot of fight left in them, that's for sure. Okay, but that's how they fight. And they still fight that way today, by the way. And I had a real takeaway because I watched these tanks fire. And then downrange, they were stacked up 55-gallon drums, and they'd go, boom, the drums would blow up. They were full of flue gas. And those guys on those radios up there looking through the window, I showed you those old radios with the telephones. They're cranking because they got their choreography off a little bit. And then I figured out that they're shooting blanks. Because sometimes the barrels would blow up and nobody fired a main gun round out of a tank. And sometimes a main gun round fired and no barrels blew up. And the Russian guy that was in charge wasn't happy about that. Okay? And so it caused me to ask a question. This guy with the checkered shirt, he's a Warrant Officer 4, CW4. He's a Russian interpreter. He works at the U.S. Embassy, at the Defense Attaché office in Moscow. And he was my interpreter. I'm talking to Popov with the white hair on the left there, far left. And I'm asking him this question. Now, as an career armor officer, the armor force heralds itself on readiness in regard to how many live rounds we shoot a day out of a tank. Okay? And a live round costs around $900, so it's not cheap. Okay? So the question becomes, if you want to get a bravado test with another tanker from another country, you ask the question, how many live rounds do your tank crew shoot each year? You settle the argument right there. Because ours is 100. So I'm asking Popov. So I asked the interpreters, ask General Popov, how many live rounds do they shoot a year? Because I haven't seen any live rounds shot today at this big demonstration, where they're really going to show their stuff. And typical Russian, comes back to the interpreter and says, ask General Tucker how many rounds his crew shoot each year. And I said 100. And he translated back to Popov, who responded with, we shoot at least 100, probably even more. Okay, so I'm like, okay, good for you. And so I'm leaving the bleacher area, the range tower there, and I'm talking to the interpreter. That's him right there with the sunglasses. And I said, Chief, I need you to do me a favor. You know any of these guys in this unit? Yes, sir, I know them all. I said, you need to find out, what we say in North Carolina, I need you to bird dog this for me. He said, what's that, sir? I said, I want you to ask them how many live rounds they shoot each year. I'm just curious. Okay, I'll find out. Just tell me sometime tomorrow. Okay. And so he came to me the next morning. I'm taking a briefing or something. He leans over and whispers in my ear. He said, sir, that question you had yesterday. I said, yeah, Chief, what was it? Sir, the answer is 0. The answer was 0. So it kind of gives you an appreciation. Again, what I'm trying to do is link my impressions that I had way back in 2005 with what we're seeing today. Okay? The soldiers that were out there training on the Russian equipment said that every time they got on a vehicle to try to drive it, it broke down. They were leaking oil. The radios didn't work. They kept trying to replace vehicles. And you know that they have busted their backsides to bring out the best of the best because they're showing it to the Americans for the first time. Okay? And so on their best effort, they couldn't even achieve a mission readiness rate that was commensurate with just teaching kids how to drive a BMP or a tank. And so the staff back in Moscow, this next picture, by the way, that's my Black Hawk. So they picked me up. So when the Russians landed at Ramstein 3 weeks later, I put Popov in that Black Hawk. I flew him to Grafenbeer, and we put all the cadets who got out of a broken down IL-76 Russian airplane, big one, like a C-17, and we put them in a couple of C-130 Hercules, and we flew them to Grafenbeer, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So while we're in Moscow, we're doing this thing called MDMP, Military Decision-Making Process. And this process has been around since Clausewitz. I mean, It's been around a long time. And what it does is that when you receive an order from a higher headquarters, you immediately send a warning order out to your subordinate organizations. Okay, so they can start parallel planning immediately. Russians don't do that. They do not send anything out. We gather our staff together, we get the planners together, and we begin a very collaborative effort to analyze the mission, to determine what our specified tasks, our implied tasks, our essential tasks. If we don't do anything else in this mission, we got to do this, or we're not going to accomplish the objective. Then we develop multiple courses of action, which are then war gamed or red teamed, and then we brief that to the commander for a decision. That's our process. Let me give you an example. So the staff officers go out and do their analysis on this order that came from higher. The intel officer determines enemy locations, the enemy's intent, the enemy's strength, what their vulnerabilities and weaknesses are, what their strengths are, what is their reconnaissance capability, what kind of UAVs do they have. The fires guy, the artillery officer, comes in. He's looking at our capability, how many guns and cannons and missiles do we have, where should we place them so they'll be in the right range to hit the targets, what's the counter battery plan, okay? What's the allocation of assets, who's going to be in direct support, who's going to be in general support, who's going to be in general support reinforcing, fire support control measures so we don't kill anybody, okay, and that we can allocate artillery tubes where they need to be on the battlefield. And fire support control measures, our example, are like the line in front of the brigades. I don't shoot behind that line because that belongs to the brigade. I shoot beyond that line. And that's how we prevent fratricide in all U.S. forces. We also have no-fire areas. If I've got a special forces team out there on a mountaintop, or an observation post, or a radar, or a friendly air defense system, I put an NFA, a no-fire area. So when we put in a fire mission, you can't shoot on that location. You cannot. It won't. The FATAS computer will not allow you to do that. It's all part of safety. And we don't hurt our own soldiers. We have target selection standards. What kind of targets are we shooting? Okay, are they comparable targets? Are they worthy of us pursuing? And we have attack guidance matrix. What kind of system we're going to use against each target? We do that analysis before we fire the first round. The maneuver guy gets up. He talks about the task organization. We're going to have so many infantry in this unit, so many tanks here, so many artillery, blah, 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 blah. Cyber gets up and talks. Tasks to subordinate units, integration of enablers, the use of Air Force fixed-wing assets for close air support, the use of attack aviation, Apaches. The protection officer stands up. He talks about our air defense plan, how we're going to protect ourselves in case we have a chemical or biological or radiological attack. The MPs talk about how we're going to keep our supply routes open. Engineers are going to talk about mobility, how we're going to get through minefields, how we're going to keep the roads running, how we're going to make sure the bridges are capable of handling our traffic for our heavy tanks, and do all the terrain analysis. Command and control gets up and talks about the commander's intent, where we're going to put our command posts, priority of fires, use of enablers, graphic control measures, priorities of work, and sustainment stands up. The most important officer is the sustainer, the logistician. The plan to sustain the force forwards for all classes of supply, and a maintenance plan to fix forward to allow the unit to achieve operational reach. General Omar Bradley, back in World War II, used to say, amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics. Napoleon said, the line between disorder and order lies in logistics. So there we were, in Russia, interacting with these Russian staff officers, and this is what we saw. The order comes in. We're starting to do our little battle drill, what I just explained to you ad nauseum, and I apologize for that. The Russians give the order to the commander. The commander goes in isolation. Now, this process I just explained to you, we can do that in about 4 to 6 hours. The more you do it, the better you get at it, obviously. The Russian commanding general, the 2-star of the division, takes the order from higher, shares it with no one, and goes into seclusion for 12 to 14 hours. He does everything I just described. He draws the graphics on the map. He draws the phase lines. He draws all where the units are, what they're going to attack, every one. And when he's done, he signs it in ink on the paper map. Then it becomes a lawful order. There's no warning order sent to subordinates. There's no collaboration of the staff, because how each staff has specialty, subject matter experts. There's a total disregard for collateral damage or civilian casualties, and the plan becomes this lawful order, and no one can deviate from that plan. And therefore, Russian commanders often reinforce failure because it's an order and it's not their responsibility. Now, when you ask about some of the atrocities and the war crimes we see in Bakhmut and other places in Ukraine, they're following orders. They're following orders. So we come back to Grafenwehr. And by the way, we're in Moscow. We're looking at each other like a stunned, catfish. What the hell's going on here? How the hell can they do this? Okay, so we put their plan. We go back to Grafenwehr, Germany, which is on the eastern side of Germany, near what was the East German border. Okay, and we put it into a constructive simulation at our simulation center there. So we got all the same people there. The soldiers are out on the ranges, driving M1 tanks, driving our Bradleys, eating in our mess halls, enjoying, spaghetti and meatballs and tossed salad. I mean, life was good. And we're inside the sim center loading this thing up. And so I get in pretty early in the morning, and Popov doesn't get in that early. They drink a lot of vodka. They drink, I could tell you vodka stories till tomorrow this time, but they drink a lot of vodka. And they don't have a good dental plan either, by the way. But anyway, so I'm in there about 5:30, and I'm getting a battle update brief, and I'm staring at the map. And the G2, the intel officer, comes in and says, "Sir, we picked up an independent tank battalion on our flank, outside our boundary, but it was threatening us." And I said, "Have you coordinated with the other unit?" He said, "I have." I said, "We need to cross-cue that with another sensor, because we had a Predator, which is an armed UAV platform. It's got about a 24-hour loiter time, and it had picked up this independent tank battalion. About 22 enemy tanks are hiding over here in the woods, so to speak. Okay, and we cross-cued it with signal intel and picked them up. And we always try to cross-cue to get two sources of intel that cross-cue together to kind of triangulate a target. And so we got a UAV over it, we're getting constant surveillance, and I am beginning the process of conducting a large missile strike using a MLRS, multiple launch rocket system, onto that to destroy that independent tank battalion. Popov comes in, and he says, and this is a little later in the morning, he says, "What?" to that chief warrant officer, he said, what are we doing here? What are we doing? And now he's a 3-star, and I'm a 1-star, but I'm his equivalent. Anyway, he says, "What are we doing?" I said, "Well, sir, we're going to attack this independent tank battalion." He said, "Where are they?" I said, "They're over here on the map." He looks and he says this, he says, "That's not where the commander said they would be." Remember, he goes into seclusion. He said, "They can't be there." Because the enemy in the constructive sim was a living, breathing, uncooperative enemy, as it should be. Okay, fighting us, doing everything they can to make us sweat, which is their job. And he said, "They can't be there. The enemy says they're going to be up here." "So why aren't they up here?" I said, "Sir, we have a saying in our military that the enemy gets a vote." And it just threw his world upside down. The enemy doesn't get a vote. They're where we say they are. And I'm looking at him like an RCA Victor dog, And so anyway, he said, "How did you find them?" I said, "We flew a UAV over it." And he's now really puzzled. And he responds with this: "Tell me more," in his Russian accent, "tell me more about these UAVs. Tell me more about these UAVs." They hadn't used them. They didn't know how to exploit their technology. And this is 2005, okay? Of course, they're using the heck out of them today, but that was interesting. We had just to give you another appreciation on how they work with each other within their army. Towards the end of it, we had a big barbecue, and we had beer there, and the soldiers were intermingling together. And we had all the officers had been staying. They wouldn't stay in the same hotel with the younger junior officers and the enlisted guys. They wouldn't stay there. They wanted their own hotel, so we got them our own hotel. So they're coming up on a bus, and they pull up. We got a big fest tent there in that big field in front of the headquarters at Grafenwehr. If you've ever been there, big grassy fields, nice summer day. It's late April, early May anyway. And they see all those people out there, they recognize they're soldiers. They wouldn't get off the bus. And I'm talking to Colonel Williams, who's now the USAR commander. I said, Daryl, get those guys off the bus. We got to get going. We're running late. He comes back over and says, sir, they won't get off the bus. I said, what's the matter? They're not. He said, to the interpreter, they're not going to mingle with these people. They're not even going to be in the same tent with them. So there is a huge chasm in their army, okay, between enlisted and officers and junior officers and senior officers. And if you're not land forces, you're nobody. If you're not land forces, you're nobody. I mean, and so I wanted to give you that, give you kind of a reflection on some of those impressions I got in my short time I had with them that I'm seeing manifest itself today. So some reflections on the ongoing battle. The Russian army has historically demonstrated a strong suit for defensive operations. I mean, if you think about it, they've been attacked 3 times. The Mongols in the 13th century, Napoleon in 1812, and the Germans in Operation Barbarossa in 1941. The Russians know how to do defense. They know how to do defense. And they're very good at it. But they suck at offense. Okay? They are terrible at offense. And one of the reasons is this. There's an old saying that like tactics, people, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. Defense is for amateurs and offense is for professionals. Okay? In the offense requires resources that are by a factor of 3. Okay? If you're going to attack one enemy company, you've got to have 3 friendly companies to reach the correlation of forces necessary to overcome one company in the defense. So everything's by a factor of 3. Okay? To include consumption rates for ammo, to include fuel, maintenance part, everything's by 3. And so as we see the current spring offensive from Ukraine, and I don't know if you call it offensive or not. It's kind of limited attacks right now. But they're suffering too, because the Ukrainian army is doing something it's never done before. It's never done anything like this before. Just imagine that. And so they're an army who's done nothing but defend up to this time, okay? And now they're having to attack. And they're doing something, an attack, like I said, it's for professionals. Attacking, conducting large-scale offensive operations in large-scale combat is the toughest damn mission a unit could ever be given, okay? And so before we throw Ukraine under the bus, let's just have an appreciation that this small country against this larger country, 11 time zones, okay, has been fighting above its weight class for about 19 months. And I'll talk a little more about that later. But the most formidable obstacle that the Ukrainian army has right now, obviously, are the massive minefields that the Russians have laid out, which they are absolutely masters at doing. And the Russian use of mines is noteworthy for 2 reasons. First, Russia is not a signatory to the 1987 Ottawa Treaty, which eliminated the use of mines on the modern battlefield. Okay? And so they didn't sign that. Number 2, the Russian army has when we did install minefields, engineers did that, and they had to log every mine, every coordinate of every mine. You had to draw a map to show where it was at against known locations like a building or a tree, a big rock, a mountaintop, a tower, so you could go back and police the mines up afterwards. Okay? Like I talked about consolidating gains earlier. The Russians have no requirement to log, mark, or map where they install minefields. They have automatic mine dispensing machines that just throw them out like frisbees. And they have a limitless amount of World War II era mines that they're using. They've delivered over 60,000 square miles of mines at a density of 5 mines per 10 square feet. It built a trench complex that's over 900 miles long. And by the way, the use of mines in Afghanistan, the United Nations is still policing up mines from Afghanistan that Russia left when they left in 1989. Okay, And so here's a country that does well in the defense, doesn't log where they put mines. They have lots of them. And they're taking advantage of a struggling country trying to penetrate these minefields. So you have to have an appreciation for how complex that is. They have come to rely a little bit. They've come to rely on UAVs exclusively. There's virtually no ground reconnaissance at all. Everything's UAVs, and they use a UAV called the Orlan 10. It's got about a 16-hour loiter time, and it flies about 3,000 to 4,000 feet. And they have a quick fire net, so when you pick up something on a UAV, you can fire artillery at the target in about 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. But so we've seen indiscriminate use of targeting by the Russian army, which begs the question, who's approving the fires? Do they have target selection standards? Do they have attack guidance matrix? Do they use fire support control measures? Do they impose a controlled supply rate on the use of ammunition so you don't expend it all? I'll talk more about that in a minute. And the answer is most likely. But one thing we're starting to see is that they have slowed down their use of rocket fires and cannon fire. They have almost gone exclusively to 120 millimeter mortars because they're running low on ammunition. You may want to ask yourself, why do you think Putin linked up with this guy Kim Jong-un last week? Okay, and unless you know it or not, most military people know, ammunition has a shelf life, by the way. All rounds of ammunition have a thing called a lot number. That lot number is associated with a period of time in which that ammunition is no longer usable, okay, because it's not going to perform to what its specifications are, so you're going to fire duds. You can bet everything that North Korea has are duds. And so let's look at some of the targeting Russia's been shooting at in contrast to what Ukraine, because folks, at the end of the day, it's all about targeting. At some point in the battle, I used to say this at these warfighter exercises, at some point in the battle, you're going to have to kill what's killing you. You're going to have to kill what's killing you. Okay? Russia's targets, shopping centers, apartment complexes, hospitals, schools, movie theaters, energy grids, and dams. Ukraine, on the other hand, is attacking command and control facilities, air defense, artillery, field artillery formations, UAV ground stations, fuel and ammo depots, troop concentrations, aircraft, combat ships, and key bridges. Okay? Kill what's killing you, or kill what's enabling the other army to kill you. And so I don't think Russia's going to win by targeting. Russia's strategy is to bomb Ukraine into submission, destroy the will of its population, and hold out long enough to allow the world stage to lose favor in supporting Ukraine. That is Putin's ultimate strategy. President Zelensky has got to cut the land bridge through Mariupol into Crimea and then destroy the Kherson Bridge. He's already destroyed one of the lanes already, okay? And so, and he must take Crimea back for the reason I mentioned earlier. It is their economic center of gravity. It is their port to the rest of the world. He's got to cut this land bridge and then destroy Russian capability in Crimea, let them escape across the bridge, and then blow the bridge. If he takes Crimea, the Donbass, Luhansk goes away. That problem goes away. Okay? I want to just pause right there for a second to see if there's any questions, because I'm going a little bit over and I don't want to take your valuable time. Yes, sir.
Why would it go away?
Because it becomes untenable. He doesn't want it anymore. It doesn't mean anything to him anymore. Because see, the Soviet naval fleet is stationed here at Stephanopol. All their battleships are here. All their airframes are right over here on the other side of Crimea. Okay, those aren't there anymore. He doesn't get all the resources, natural resources he gets from Crimea either. He loses Crimea. Putin loses Crimea. He loses Ukraine. He loses Ukraine. So anyway, what you could call measures of success, I think, and there's a lot of think tanks that agree, measures of success. How much, the amount of terrain Ukraine has recovered, the reduction of Russian forces' capability, combat power, and the opinion of Western supporters. Those are his measures of success. If he's hitting all three of those with positive comments and positive results, we think he's going to be successful. And just a final comment, Ukraine cannot win a fight with the Russian army unless it has the ability to achieve air superiority, even if it's only partial. And it has to have, second to that would be the ability to strike targets from long range with precision. We have that capability to provide Ukraine, and we've been slow to provide it. Most of the stuff we've given Ukraine, to be honest with you, and people say, why are we giving them so much of this army equipment? You know, that's expensive. It's stuff we don't use anymore. We don't use that anymore. We're driving M1A2 version 5 tanks. We're giving them M1A1 tanks, the same tank I used in Desert Storm. Okay, we're giving them M113s, not using those anymore. We're giving them N2 Bradleys, we're not using them anymore. You seen those pictures of those airplanes out in the Sierra Nevada desert? Well, think of the same thing, but armored vehicles, okay? We're giving them that they can certainly use. Russia and Ukraine are currently, today, at parity in tanks. And Russia had them outnumbered by about 6,000 tanks when it started. Now, Russia's tank supplies, they're down to about 2,000, maybe 1,900 tanks right now. And those are old. Those are old tanks. You're not seeing any T-80s. You're not seeing any T-1 Armada tanks out there anymore. Okay. Russia has trouble sustaining itself. They're poor logisticians because they've always done good at the defense. Defense is not very dynamic. Okay. Russia's running out of ammunition. Think about this for a minute. How many nations are aligned with Russia in this fight? You could argue maybe Iran, North Korea, Belarus. Okay, how many people are aligned with Ukraine? 50 and counting. 50. What happened in World War II? You could argue that the Third Reich had a very, very mighty industrial base. I mean, the Germans can make some tanks. They're the best tank builders probably ever, okay, and build aircraft. What happened to that industrial base when the West woke up and energized its industrial base? There's ammunition alone. The United States Army, we fire 8,000 rounds a year just for training purposes, to keep our artillery crews proficient. I don't know how many the Russians shoot, probably none, okay. The Russians were shooting 90,000 rounds a month. They shot, in 1 month, they would shoot, a whole decade's worth of our ammunition use for training. So what we've done is we've stood up 3 more ammunition plants. They're all 24/7. And what we're producing, what was producing 20,000 rounds a month, we're producing 45,000 a month, and we'll probably double that in the next 6 months. And the Western countries of Europe are doing the same thing. The Western industrial base is waking up from a deep sleep. There's no way Russia, as big as it is, there's no way Russia could handle that, just like the Third Reich couldn't handle it in World War II. So it's not a matter of, for me personally, it's my personal opinion, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Ben Hodges thinks it's going to be before Christmas. I don't know. Ground's going to get soft here pretty soon, okay? But I think by this time next year, I think this will be done. But think about this, and Dave and I talked about this, was the outcome. Where does this take us? Think about this. Because there's not going to be a peace. There's going to be another Cold War on a grand scale. And it could be not only just conventional munitions, it could be nuclear as well. And so I think all of our diplomats who kind of took their eye off the ball when Putin was doing all this stuff need to get their eye back on the ball and start thinking about where does this end, okay? But I personally think that it's going to be another Cold War on a grand scale, okay? And there's there's some think tanks talk about how did you take radical Germany? Because remember, Germany attacked France and Belgium in World War I. And that obviously led to the Versailles Treaty. And then Germany attacks again Poland in 1939 and Russia. And then we had D-Day, okay? So this belligerent Germany, think about how we brought them back into the fold of democratic-like thinking nations. What was that process? Okay, how do we do that with Russia? And I know I'm way up here right now where the oxygen's real thin, but I want to share. I read this book by Condoleezza Rice and Philip Zelikow, because what happened in Europe from like 1987 to 1991 is phenomenal. And we talked about this a little bit before we started. This book tells you what happened. Okay, how did the Soviet Union fall? How is it that the Soviet Union reverted back to being the Russian Federation? Okay, and who all was involved? Okay, Mitterrand, Kohl, H.W. Bush, Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, phenomenal world leaders who did that. And I think it lends itself to putting an influence against what we're seeing in Ukraine. And I want to stop right there, I swear. I apologize for getting a little long-winded on you. This topic, it has so many spider trails off of it that we could talk for hours and get into some really, really interesting debates. But I appreciate your time and your interest in hearing what it is I had to say and some of my reflections about training with the Russian Army. Thank you.